Hi everyone, this is Wolf Branch Homestead. Today we're going to share with you some information and some tips about homemade focaccia bread. Hopefully I tried to make sure that I said that correctly. And some people consider it a bread, some consider it separate. We're going to share with you some of our tips with that. And the description below will have a link to the recipe that we use. It's not traditional, but it's something that was really simple for me to make as a beginning bread maker. And also, everybody in the family has really enjoyed this recipe. It goes great with almost any meal or even by itself. It's highly requested to make more of it and usually doesn't last beyond one day. We talked about this recently in one of the hummingbird feeder streams a few days ago, and I showed an up close look of the bread and was talking about how I would have to step away for a minute and basically go make sure I got this out of the oven or put it in the oven essentially. And it's really delicious. And there are some things that I've learned over time of making this bread that help to make it simpler for people. So, one of the first things that I'm going to talk about is when you go to make the dough. So, one of the first things you have to do is proof your yeast. For this, I found that the tap water will actually get just hot enough to be the right temperature for the yeast to be proofed. One of your first things is you mix your sugar and water. I think some people will use honey, but we use sugar. Then you add the yeast and you let it sit and make sure that the yeast is actually coming to activate, I guess you would say, and bubbling up correctly. So one of the things with this is we do not have a stand mixer. I really want one because I do a lot of baking, but I have yet to actually get one. So maybe in the future it might be a Christmas gift, I'm hoping. And so what we do is we're actually going to mix this in a bowl. So we have a large mixing bowl and we do this first step in that, and that's where we're going to do everything with the dough. So once we put the yeast in there, we make sure the water temperature is going to be correct for that yeast, and then we let that sit for a little while. In the process of letting this sit, we take a large pizza pan and we coat it with a little bit of flour. Because we don't have an actual stand mixer, I have to knead this dough by hand. So I'm going to take this and actually knead it on this pizza pan. It's a really easy to clean surface and to actually knead it out on. So after I flour that and the yeast has actually set, then we go to mixing the rest of the ingredients in that mixing bowl. I use a wooden spoon with a little bit of olive oil on it, and it helps from sticking so bad to the spoon when I'm going to mix everything together. It makes it a little bit easier for it to actually get cleaned up. After that, we take the dough out onto the pizza pan that's a little bit floured, and people do it differently with how they treat the dough and how they coat their hands to be able to prepare the dough, but I usually just have a little bit of flour on my hands when I go to knead it out. And then once you've kneaded it properly, then you're going to form it into a ball. And what I do is, since I've taken it out of this mixing bowl, in the process of actually taking it out and putting it on the pan, I then put the oil in the bottom of the mixing bowl and spread it around a little bit. I take that dough ball and put it back into the mixing bowl, cover with the damp towel, and then let it sit for the amount of time that it needs to rise. Then after that point, what I do is I've used that same pizza pan, I clean it up a little bit, and I have it set aside for when I take it out to actually roll the dough out. So when it says to turn the dough in the recipe, the actual video for it doesn't show a second turning of the dough itself, like not another kneading, I guess you would say. It's basically just you take that dough ball and you turn it over and out onto whatever surface you're going to prepare it on. So I take this dough, I lightly flour the pizza pan again. Again, it's a really large pizza pan because this is a big recipe here. I've lightly floured it, and then I turn the dough out onto that, and I roll the dough out to the right thickness, and then I cover it again with that damp towel. This, you can kind of shape it different ways, but the thing that I do with this is by preparing it on the pizza pan, I'm actually going to use this to bake it in, or bake it on rather, so that I'm not taking it and putting it into a different thing. I'm using this same pan to do my initial kneading of the dough, cleaning it up a little bit, then I'm rolling it out on it, and I'm also going to take that and bake it that way. Some people will make it rectangular and they'll put it in a pan that way, and then some people will bake it flat like this. And for me, this is just the way that's worked for me, and I've really enjoyed it. And I've tried different ways, but this is kind of the go-to way because of the fact that it makes cleanup so much easier, and you can kind of all do a couple different steps all on that one pan. So you've rolled it out and you let it sit a little bit longer. I think it's about 20 minutes with the actual damp towel on there. And again, just make sure you reference the actual instructions on the website that we're going to link for you, and that'll give you more information as to what the recipe calls for. Then after it's set for that longer period of time, that second longer sitting time essentially, then it comes time to put everything on it. So I was unable to find flaky salt, so I just used regular salt, but I used it in moderation by pinching it with my fingers and spreading it across the top. And I do all the other steps as far as the oiling, the rosemary, and the salt before I actually put the indentions in there, because when I put the indentions in there with my finger, then all the oil likes to pool inside of that spot. So I do everything beforehand. I usually take a small almost like a grilling brush, but like the plastic kind instead of the bristle kind, and or the rubberized, I guess you would say, and use that to spread the oil out on top of the bread. And I've used fresh rosemary, but a lot of us do not prefer that on there. And to make it more, I guess you'd say, palatable for the family, because a lot of people don't like the big fresh rosemary on top, we've used like some dry flakes of it, and it's less noticeable, and it still adds that great flavor to it. So we put the oil, then we put the dried rosemary across the top and the salt. And then we go around and make the indentions with our finger. So after we've done all that, it's time to go in the oven. So you could make sure you keep an eye towards the end of your cooking time to make sure the loaf is coming out right, or rather it's more like a flatbread. So make sure you keep an eye out towards the end of the cooking time to make sure that it's coming out and it's not burning or something like that. And the one that I showed on the camera was a little bit lighter colored than the pictures I'm including, so I needed to adjust my time a little bit less, but still it was really, really good. And we like a little bit more salt on there, so I'll adjust the salt kind of to how our tastes are. And another interesting thing is, if you already have the pizza pan, well, I bet you have a pizza cutter. So when I go to cut this focaccia bread up, I actually use a pizza wheel, a pizza cutter, and segment it out in kind of the same fashion, and it makes nice little portions for everybody to eat. And one thing that we tried was making a olive oil dip that had like Italian seasonings and garlic, onion, salt, pepper, other things like that in the olive oil, and you could either dip your bread in it or drizzle it on there. And tried that and enjoyed it actually. So different toppings and different things that you'd like to dip it in or pair it with are really, really nice. But it's good just to be eaten by itself. One thing I highly recommend is to eat this when it comes out of the oven. You know, let it sit and cool down, obviously, but eat this fresh. If you try to put this in an airtight container, it gets these little, like, crystallizations almost on top. I wouldn't know how to explain it, but I guess from the moisture in it. And it gets not quite the right texture anymore. It loses the way that it was when it first came out of the oven. And you can heat it up, but for me, I prefer it when it comes out of the oven, that the texture of it is just perfect then, and it's so good when it first comes out. So make sure it cools down, but you can still eat it, the next day. It's just going to have a little bit different texture to it. But all in all, this is a really good recipe. And again, it's different for everybody. It's not a traditional recipe, and it's done a lot different from some of the others that I have seen make this bread. And again, hopefully I've pronounced it right. I tried to make sure. But we're going to share the recipe with you. And we really appreciate recipes like this being available. So if you have a recipe that we could make without a stand mixer that is more close to the traditional style, then let us know. Please do share with us any helpful recipe links and things like that. And as always, we appreciate you watching and hope that you have a wonderful day.